Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar will be about the energy space invaders. Dr. Fridrik Larsen of LarsEn Energy Building will tell us all about it later, but first let's start with a short introduction. I'm Thomas Boersma, project manager at Solarplaza, and these webinar series are in the run-up to our future grid labs. I'll tell you more about it later. After the short introduction, we'll get the presentation by Dr. Fridrik Larsen, and after that, we'll have a Q&A about the presentation. So the future grid labs, as you probably are aware, next week we'll have the first one on hydrogen, the week afterwards on asset circularity in the energy sector, and on the 27th of May on customer centricity, and that's also why we're doing this webinar on customer engagement in the energy sector today. During the lab, we'll talk about the democratization of the energy sector, the rise of the prosumer, changing roles and responsibilities of the companies in it, and how to engage with these new customers who are having different expectations from energy than they used to have. So for today's webinar, if you have technical issues, please use the chat box. If you have questions, use the question box. We'll answer them in the end of the presentation, but you can send them all the presentation along. The recordings will be available after the webinar, and the slides can be downloaded from the handout section on the right side of your screen. They're available in PDF, and we'll send them along the recordings as well. Then to today's webinar, Dr. Fridrik Larsen, CEO at LarsEn Energy Building. He will tell us about the energy space invaders. Dr. Fridrik, I'm gonna.
Yes, hi, Thomas.
Hand over control to you, and you should be able to control the presentation right now. Thank you for joining us today and giving the presentation.
All right, no problem. My pleasure, actually. It's what I'm going to talk about is something very, very old in regular markets, but new in energy markets. And I call this energy space invaders. It will be explained in a little while why I call this energy space invaders. So just for those who are listening, just to give a short background on myself, then I wear three hats, if you will. I'm a faculty member of the University of Iceland, where I teach marketing and branding. And I've done a lot of research into the energy markets and in marketing and branding in particular. I'm the CEO of LarsEn Energy Building. We only work for energy companies, and that can be defined broadly, both producers of energy appliances or those who are selling electricity, distributing, or and so just anyone in the energy space, like I call it. And then I host a yearly conference called Charts. It's the fourth time we do it. It attracts about 300 people worldwide, where we talk about how you should communicate within the energy space. All this is linked through branding, because that's the combining factor. So that's me. And sorry, Thomas, I'm just gonna, yeah, and this is the ecosystem that I work from. This is a slide showing the same thing I showed in the beginning, and but except the university part is not here. So the consultancy is LarsEn. Charts is the community. That's where we interact with a lot of people around the world, and many of the largest utilities, actually, and energy companies around come here. And then we do comparisons through benchmarking products that we work with. So to start this, why is this guy talking about branding in the energy space? And I'm gonna, because I mostly work with retailers, and I'm in many cases incumbents, which are used to a certain kind of thinking. They are not used to having to think about the client. So what I normally do when I start talking with the new company, or when I give a presentation in front of a diverse audience, I'll show cases of how people are actually wrong. So I show them, because what we are doing in the energy space, although we've been doing it for the past 10 years, 20 years, if we'll keep on doing it, we will go out of business, we'll be bankrupt. That's because times are obviously changing. And I don't know how many of you know this guy that I'm showing you. This is a British children's play, or this is Postman Pat. At his time, and this is he is, I don't know, 40, 50 years old, this figure, but this guy was the a shining sample of what a good postal service should do. He delivered on time, he was friendly, he was reliable, he had a smiley face, and he even had a cat with him. So, but when you've changed from Postman Pat to a drone, all the old principles, they don't apply anymore. They just simply don't apply. And we are moving in energy space through a world that is dramatically changing, and we have to change along. We have to leave where we were and head to a new destination. And just to show people that didn't really realize the changes that they were facing in their industries, this guy is he was the head of the British Post Office in 1876, as you can see there below. And he said, okay, Americans have need of the telephone, but we do not. We have plenty of messenger boys. So, I mean, this is a little bit strange, more than 100 years later. It wasn't that incorrect at the time, but it's most definitely not reading correctly into the future. This guy here, he said that, and he was the CEO of IBM, by the way, and he thought in 1943 that there might perhaps be market for 5 computers. Obviously, he was incorrect also. Let's move on with people that got it wrong. There's a little bit of lag in the slides, I think. Sorry. Okay, here we go. This guy, this is actually my favorite. He said, there's no chance that the iPhone is going to get any significant market share. No chance. This is a direct quote. This is Steve Ballmer, then head of Microsoft. He thought it was such a ridiculous idea that anyone might actually be wanting to buy a tablet for 1,000 euros. So he thought it was a stupid idea, basically. But, if I would be looking at you, those who are listening to me, and asking you to raise your hands if you had an iPhone, probably a third of you would raise your hand. So obviously he was incorrect also. So there's a lot of cases where people had the wrong idea of where their interest was going or is going. Same thing applies in energy, in the energy space today. And many of the utilities, because bear in mind again, although I'm talking to Solarplaza here, the principles are the same, although this is more tailored to electricity sales, electricity transmission distribution. So the utilities, if we will talk about them, the incumbents, they will not be fighting what I call the next your friendly next door utility neighbor. So, and I was thinking, how in the world can I help people to understand what I'm doing? How can I help them to understand that a brand actually matters? So I thought the Americans, they talk about the energy space. So that's where I adapted that from. So energy space, for me, a non-native Englishman or non-native English speaker, then space is for me Star Trek, Star Wars, space up there. So that got me thinking about the Space Invaders, that old arcade. This is normally, I show this with with the video, but we'll make do with the PDF here. These are this is our old arcade from 1978, I think it was, from the Space Invaders. So essentially, the Space Invaders, we are down at the bottom here. It's us, and we are fighting aliens that will, in the end, crush us, unless we don't react. So I thought, the Space Invaders, energy. So I said, well, why don't I come up with the energy Space Invaders? There's a different breed of things. So I replaced the aliens. I replaced them with modern day aliens that will be competing within energy. And some of you who are actually listening to me, you might be one of these aliens. You're replacing. The customer wants the electrons, and you're replacing the company that's now giving it to them with your new technology. So in effect, you are an energy space invader. So I don't know if you know this. Think about this. I'm just gonna go to the next slide, then you can see who they are. There's many more, but we know about Apple, we know about Amazon, we know about Google, we know about Tesla, but then here, eCare is an energy space innovators because they will be selling electricity out of the store, and they actually are through batteries, but I'm talking about in a larger scale. And they are selling appliances, they're selling stuff, selling tech that replaces the need for someone to go to your traditional electricity retailer to buy stuff from them. So those are the energy space innovators. And again, this should be a video, but it's being a PDF, I can't show it. So I animated the new space invaders, and I showed how we should be fighting those. But the moral of the story here is not to show some catchy images. These guys up here, the Amazons, the Googles, the Apples of the world, and some of you guys, you are fighting with a different tool. And their major weapon that the energy space doesn't have is simple. It's the understanding. Then you need to understand your client, your customer. You need to understand people that you're trying to sell to or stay in business with. Simple as that. But that thought is sometimes very foreign in the energy space because people are used to connecting lines to line. They're not connecting to consumers' mind. That's what branding is all about. So a brand, what's a brand? My PhD is branding. It's energy branding. I'm the only person in the world that actually has a degree in how you talk to the energy client, how they think differently, how they react differently, what they want to hear, what they don't want to hear. Because if you want to go out and you want to spend money on traditional advertising, you're probably going to waste a lot of money. So you have to talk, you have to spend them carefully. So a simple way to explain a brand, let me show you here some logos from German car manufacturers. We all know these logos. And when we see them, something happens in our minds. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, my cursor moving, but I'm moving anyway. Up here is Audi. When we see that, something different happens in our mind than when we see, for example, Porsche or BMW. And these are not coincidences. We did not invent those feelings that we have. We've been told about them. We've been told what Mercedes does. We've been told what Opel does, because that's branding. We've been told through generations, hundreds of years, decades at least, that BMW is the ultimate driving machine, and Mercedes is about prestige. This is what we've been told, and that when we see it, this happens. That's brand, something that's been invested in our minds, and when we see it, we react. And here's Tesla. You have reached a good state in branding when a client tells you, I love your brand, or I love you. I love Tesla. Love is a big word. If you love a product, you love a service, you have an emotional connection above and beyond just tech connection or a rational connection. You have an emotional connection. I'll explain that a little bit later. And that's what brands are all about, to be both rational and emotional. So it's not about the best or the most powerful or the fastest. It's about also having an emotional connection directly to your consumer's mind. Pardon me. So Apple, they don't say the best computer or best iPhone or whatever. They say think different, and they want us to have a feeling towards Apple. They want to invest in a feeling. And just to digress a little bit, I showed German cars there. I mean, if I think, and if you own a feeling, or if you own a word in the consumer's mind, you really have a lot of brand equity. If you think about a Volvo owns security. They are the car in the world that own the world. They own the word secure. That's a big brand equity asset. So moving on, when you are thinking about brands, you have to think about two things in general. There are two things that you have to watch out for. Firstly, you have to understand who you are. You have to understand your identity. You have to understand how your organization looks, at yourselves, how your employees look at yourselves, how your community maybe looks, how you're placed in the community, etc. So your identity, understand thyself first. Take an inward look. And the first step in terms of branding is always this. Look inside the organization, look inside the company. That's the mostly people skip that. They just go to an ad agency and they draw nice graphics and they spend money on publishing. Incorrect. You have to start looking inwards first. When you've done that, then you can try to start understanding how the world sees you. That's your image. And if you've been around for a long time, then there's some time heritage. People look at you a certain way because you've been around for a long time, or you've done good branding for a long time, so you invested through the years. And many have not been around for a long time, like Tesla I showed you. They've been relatively short, but they still own a very big share of consumers' minds. So in identity and image, and we have to try to maximize the overlap between those as much as we possibly can, because otherwise we'll be wasting money. If we think we are one thing and the client sees us, or our target group sees us as something else, we will not reach them. We have to speak their language. If you think about, since I say languages, if we speak German to an English guy, he doesn't know English, he's not going to listen to us. We better just learn English or German or whatever language. I mean, maybe it's a silly example, but it's to the point at least. So, and another thing which is very important, that branding is not about a logo. And this image that you see here, this is the way we see the energy brand. And here we see, if many people, when they think about branding, they think about some kind of advertising. So I'm not sure if you see my mouse moving, but this part here on the left-hand side, maybe is it 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock here, we see advertising. But that's just a very, very, very small portion of the whole thing, because branding is about holistic image of how you look at your community, how you look at yourself and your place in it. So you have to think about a lot of things. So it's not about logos, it's about, it's a philosophy. Branding is a philosophy of how you conduct yourself in the world. You can be brand oriented, you can be marketing oriented, or you don't have to. You can also be very product oriented. You can be focusing on something else. That's fine. But if you choose not to be brand oriented, you are losing money, because all the empirics show that money invested in good branding has a very high return on investment. So you're basically choosing to throw money away if you're not a brand. I'm painting with a broad brush here, and in some cases, maybe there are some marginal things we need to think about, but empirically it's true. If you're not thinking about brands, if you're not trying to invest your marketing budget to be a brand, you are losing out. So, but in a commodity space, energy is a commodity. It's you cannot touch it or see it or feel it. You can't build an emotional connection to a commodity, or can you? That's the question. So when I did the PhD, I had to first convince the university where I was at in England. I had to convince them you could actually brand a commodity. It was a challenge, because it's only 10 years ago that I started the PhD, and they weren't going to allow me to do it, because they said you cannot differentiate a commodity. It's true up to a point, but still you have to believe that you can do it. So I'm going to talk about brands and commodities. I don't know how well you can see this in your computers, but what we are looking at here is a commodity. This is a white commodity, and this is actually just think in your minds what you possibly think this might be. Now you've had 5 seconds to think, not a lot, but this is salt. We're looking at salt. Salt is just as much as a commodity as energy. So, but we still have brands, and this brand here, this is Maldon. They are the #1 selling salt. They are #1 not because they are a better salt. or a different salt in any way, but they are a brand. They have a heritage, and they paint a picture, and they address our emotions when they talk to us. And they also they tell us that their flakes are a little bit more crystallized, a little bit more sugary. I'm sure they have some grounds to say it, but for the normal mind, we can't sense it. We can't see a difference if we don't see a package. But we believe in the brand. So that's Moldon. So let's take another example. Think about a banana. And depending on where you are in the world, you would say different things. But if you were to think about a banana, and this is a Chiquita banana that you see here, if I would have asked you, and again, it would have worked better when we're in the same room, and in most parts of the world, people would say Chiquita. Some say Doyle, some say something else. But banana is a pure commodity, like salt, like energy. But we still choose the banana with a label on it because it already lives in our mind. That's the brand equity again, that word, brand equity. We have invested in psychological, emotional, rational connections in the consumer's mind. That's branding. So you can brand a banana, although they are just the same. And just to continue with the banana story, so this secret it often appears when you think about it. So banana. Let's move a little bit forward. We talked about bananas, we talked about salt. What about Smirnoff? Smirnoff is the world's #1 selling strong drink. And this is Prince Equal here on the side. It's about half the price, 1/3 of the price of Smirnoff. It does the same thing. It gets you drunk. You will be equally much hungover if you drink it. You won't be any prettier, although you think so. It's just the very same thing. 40% spirit. And you will probably not taste a lot of difference, if any, if you don't know what you're drinking. But we still pay the premium because Smirnoff is a brand. The money that Smirnoff has invested in the brand is paying off because people pay a premium for this particular brand. Or when there's a heavy competition, they buy that brand instead of the other brand. So although in the case of energy, for example, sometimes you might not be charging all that much of a premium, which is true because there's not a lot of margins in energy space, but at least people will buy your product. The other ones just will be left out. So that's the power of branding. And this has been done in water also. If you look at this picture, you can see that we've taken a natural resource, we take it out, and it's a commodity when we take it out when we turn off the faucet, and we put it into a bottle and brand it, and voila, it sells for 10 times, 20 times, because it's a brand. That's the only difference. It's a brand. So if you aren't convinced yet that brands pay off, then this hopefully shows you that it does pay off. But you have to do it right. You can also just throw away money if you do it incorrectly. So it pays off because it has a high return on investment. And some CEOs and executives, they think that the marketing people don't know anything about money. They just know about creative stuff, classy colors or nice images. And some do, I'm sure. But if you're a good marketer, you need to know that the money you want people to spend on your ideas pays off. In terms of branding, it pays off. And the easiest way to explain this is to show a bottle of Coca-Cola. And this is it's not a very original idea of mine to show a Coca-Cola bottle, but it's true. If we take a Coca-Cola bottle like we're looking at here, and more than half of the value of that particular drink, the market cap of Coca-Cola, is the brand. It's not the cars it's not the factories, it's not the recipe, it's not any of that. It's how much it's worth in the consumer's mind, because they know it already and they will keep on buying it because it lives in their mind. This is where we need to go in energy. And some companies are actually doing it already. There are, without mentioning any names, there are mega brands around that are wanting to be the Coca-Cola of energy. We'll see how they succeed. but some are not thinking about it at all. They're just still plugging, they are taking a line and connected it to a meter. They don't even talk about customers. They talk about meters or endpoints or loads. They don't talk about people of flesh and blood. They should be doing it. They need to know the customer. So if you go to some stock, if you'll take some indices out of stock markets, we can always see that those companies that own strong brands, on average, make more money. So again, return on investment is higher if you spend your money wisely on branding. So I'll say it for the third time, you can also very easily throw away money on brands and marketing if you do it incorrectly. So you have to be careful. And while you're doing it, to be careful, you have to measure how you're doing it. So if you don't want to throw your money away, you have to figure out what's the best way to approach it. So why measure? You measure because of this. Half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is, I don't know which half. This is the direct quote to John Wanamaker. He was the first American retailer to actively promote his products in the mass media. So before that, it wasn't done on the scale that he did. And he was asked this question, and this is his reply. But the thing is, although this is a 100-year-old example, it's still true today. A lot of companies are just spending masses, pounds, euros, dollars, whatever, on marketing, but they are throwing a good portion of it away. So you have to measure. So before I talk about measurements, I showed you the ecosystem in the beginning of this presentation. I showed you the ecosystem of how LarsEn works with benchmarking tools and how it works with the conference charts I told you about. At charts, we award the world's best energy brands. And it's done on a very, very rigorous criteria. You can't buy into it. You have to be nominated by a big panel. And the panel consists of 40 people around the world, which are all very skilled in measuring what a good brand is. And then they have to ask their clients about questions. And the clients also have to tell if they're a good brand or not. But anyway, so these are the points that identify what a good brand is. So I will start on the first point here. Branding is a philosophy. It's not a haphazard idea of doing something. It's not something you do because it's trendy at the moment. You do it because it's your philosophy of running a business. It's a consumer-centric philosophy where you try as much as you can to know your customer and fulfill his wishes. Second thing is the world's best brands. They don't contract this out to an ad agency. They don't leave the marketing manager without any influence. It's understood throughout the organization. The management and the CEO and the board understands and supports this. And this actually is oftentimes very much of a problem because branding doesn't have a lot of airtime on the boards of companies. It's frowned upon, and it's not for us. It's not. We are finance people. We are engineers, so we don't do this branding stuff. Incorrect. You can choose not to do it, but you'll lose money. So, and the companies, those world's best, they need to have a very strong purpose. They are purpose driven. They have a goal. They want to reach some kind of milestones. They are not there just because they've always been there. They have a purpose. They are a community. So there's a community from the companies to the clients and also internally. They are proactive. They don't wait for something to happen. They are not reactive. And if they see that their market might be disrupted, they try to disrupt it first. They don't wait for someone to force them to do anything. At the end of the day, in a market that's competing, you will not call the shots. So you might as well try to be at the forefront of changes. They know their segments. These companies, the world's best brands, they know their segments. They know how to talk to them. They know how to split them up. They know which segment is the most lucrative, which one is the worst, which one is the most difficult, which one is most willing to pay a premium, all those things. So, and they know themselves. Remember, we talked about image and identity in the beginning. So they know who they are. They know themselves. It's very, very important. And they offer different products. So you can, as a customer, you can go to them and they are a one-stop shop, and you can actually choose green products, whatever products. Just, sometimes it's an actual choice, sometimes it's an illusion of choice, but at least their client can actually choose from products within their organization. So keep it simple, stupid. They are simple. And simple is good. People understand who they are, what they do, and how they do it, and they are graphically well presented, obviously. So these are the points. So I'm telling you this now because you need to understand where you are at each of those points, and you need to understand how you are as a brand. This applies to energy companies, anyone basically selling to the energy space or the world in general. And we measure brands on 3 different pillars. It's not just me saying it, it's the academic literature and the professional ways of conducting business. So what I'm going to tell you about now is the tool that we use to measure how good a brand you are. And it's based on those pillars: differentiation, so how you're different from someone else, how you talk to your segments and how well defined they are, etc., etc., and what the image and perception consumers have of you. If you measure those 3 with the right tools, you should be able to understand on a holistic level how good you are as a brand. And if you measure these 3, you get one number, which is your ABI score, Energy Branding Benchmarking Index. It's the ABI score. And that score tells you on a scale from 0 to 100 how good you are. So then some of you might be thinking, okay, so what is it worth to me to know a simple number? Well, for one thing, it tells you how good you are relative to other companies in your area, in your country, in your continent, in the world. So so if you think you're good, you might realize that you're awful. If you know that you are scoring 50 and the world's best are scoring 80, 81, which is actually what they're doing. And just to give a very easy example, let's say some of you out there are runners and you run a marathon and you run it in 3 hours, which is pretty good. And someone asks you how fast do you run the marathon? And you say 3 hours, or if you're on 10K, you run it in 40 minutes or 45 minutes. You've already defined your qualities as a runner. So it already puts you in a bracket. If you run sub 40 in 10K, you're good. And the world knows about it. It doesn't say how well you train, what you eat, how you sleep, none of it, but it tells how good you are. It gives you a benchmark where you can work from. If you think it's good to run the marathon in 10 hours, because that's what everybody just thinks so, you will learn differently when you actually enter the New York Marathon. You will be, not less, but you will not be winning at least. So it gives you a platform to work from. So that's what this ABI does. And also the score gives you indication of where you should be. If you score 70 and over, you're okay, but it doesn't mean that you're good. You need to be scoring 80, 85 to be really benefiting from a strong brand. Then your customer churn is lower, loyalty is higher, people pay a premium, and I could list 20 items that actually you benefit from raising that score up higher. So next slide here. So, and these scores are based on things I've discussed already. I'm trying to be coherent in this presentation. I'm going to open it I'm going to close it like I opened it. So brands are a rational thing and an emotional thing. And this is a pyramid that shows the way a brand should be built up in an energy brand. So at the very bottom here is awareness. Awareness is good, but it doesn't sell anything. People knowing about you is fine, but it's not to say that you're a brand. It's just people know you. And there's a world of difference between awareness and a brand. And if we want to build a good brand, we have to figure out what kind of emotional factors we could actually build into our brand. And I've taken here those who are helpful in energy, but we always have to find out what is good for you and your market. So progressive, helpful, caring, warm, friendly, legacy, easy, secure, love, fun, exciting. So we need to figure out what emotions we can tap into if you want to be a brand. But we also need to be rational. Being in energy with a fundamental product that cannot fail, of course we must be rational. But in general, within the energy space, there's so much overemphasis on the rationality, and emotions get lost. So we never move up to be a brand. We never move up here on the top to have resonance where people love us. It just hardly doesn't happen because we are shy and we don't want to figure out what emotions we can possibly build into a brand, but we have to. So, and benchmarking and using a score like the EPI tool helps us to build our own pyramid. What should be our emotional factors? What should be our rational factors? So just to end it, here we are. Sometimes I'll put this slide first. And for the third time, if I was looking at you at the moment, I'd probably do it. But if you look at this and you read what it says here, and I can't see your replies, but could you possibly know what brand this is? And if here it says the third place, and just out of random, oasis, sensual, relationships, meditation, learning, laughter, spiritual, design diversity. There's a lot of different things here. But at the center of it, the third place. I wonder if any of you can guess what brand this is. I got this from the founder, or actually a guy who worked with the founder called Scott Badbury, and he helped make the Starbucks brand what it is today. Before Starbucks was built, as physically built, the emotional connections were designed. And they wanted to build the third place. They wanted, the third place is the one after home and work. They wanted the sensual or sensory experience. They wanted to have meditation effects. They wanted to be for relationship. They wanted to be for just to meet as a third place. And this was a new idea in designing a coffee place. And they used the brand to begin with. They designed what they wanted people to feel, experience, live when they came to Starbucks. And the history writes itself. We know all now about Starbucks. I forget the statistics, but there's hundreds of thousands of those places in the world because it's a good brand. So energy branding, what we say is the missing elements for your success. And it really and truly does pay off when you think about it and when you do it properly. But that's not to say that everybody in the energy space is actually actively using it. But they might want to think about it. So that's my 10 cents for you guys on brands. Are there any questions?
Thanks a lot, Fridrik. And before we go to the questions, I must say I didn't guess the Starbucks, and I think many with me. So first of all, thanks for a very interesting presentation. And maybe the first question here, what is the biggest challenge when it comes to branding in the energy space? So is there one challenge that stands out for you?
Yes, definitely. There is one big challenge. And that's actually the people controlling the companies, because they don't think that brands should be on the agenda. And to a large extent, these are smart people, but they are trained in a different way of thinking. They are engineers, they're very binary, on off. So the creative side doesn't have a place in their minds because it's not, can't be measured in the same way. So most of the time, when I start to work with a new client, the big clients, I have to convince the board and I have to convince the management that we should actually start our journey to become brands because it makes money. So problem is people in the companies.
Okay, that's thank you. And that maybe taps into one of the questions here. Somebody saying, thinking about the water example, how can a company brand energy being a commodity uh, when it's still something very far away from the customer? So the water bottle, I think, can be in somebody's hand, but energy might be still be a bit abstract. Is that is that a challenge as well?
Yes, it's a really good question, and of course it's much harder to brand a commodity, which by definition looks the same to everyone, than something we can touch, feel, smell, taste. It's harder. Believe me, it's harder. But if you, for example, if you take if you take perfumes and cosmetics and all that stuff, then 30% of the price we are paying for whatever we're paying, I'm generalizing, of course, it will be spent back to marketing to me. So 30% of the revenue goes into marketing. We could never use 30% of our revenues for commodities to marketing. It's just not possible. Maybe it's 0.5%, maybe it's 3%, on a good day. So there's less room to move commodities, but that doesn't exclude the fact that we should use branding. So it's harder, but you can absolutely do it. The cases show it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, thanks. And another question: do you think, besides that, the companies have to change, that the consumers are changing over time, especially with energy? I think people are getting more aware of the energy they use, and is there a shift there moving?
Yeah, another great question. The consumers are changing, but maybe the question refers to green and renewable, and my generation. And my picture is there. I'm younger than you, Thomas, but I'm a different generation from you. My generation, we say we are green, but we're not willing to pay for it. So it's hard for a company to have a very strict green positioning or sustainable positioning, if you will, because we don't want to pay for it. But the younger generations, those who are in school now and those who are graduating now, they will be voting with their wallets. They say they are green and they pay for green. So they definitely do it. So the consumer's mind is changing, and it's not going to be an option whether you're sustainable or green, or you have to do it, otherwise you'll just miss out. But there is another big change that kind of disrupts the market. In terms of disruption, we talk about technology as disruption, but we also talk about consumers' mind as disruptions. Let me take an example. The electric car market or car market. I showed you German cars earlier, and the home of the German car manufacturers is Stuttgart. Stuttgart is what Detroit was 30 years back, 40 years back. It has a lot of money, and that's where all those fantastic cars were built. Detroit went bust. It's coming up again, but not for cars, but for something else. So there is an actual scenario where Stuttgart will also go bust. Again, I paint with a broad brush. So that's two things that can happen in terms of cars. One is, of course, electric cars will replace those traditional cars that I showed, Mercedes and all them, and they'll be coming from China, because Chinese are way ahead of us in electric cars. So when the paradigm has changed, we don't think as much about brand. So we might as well buy a Chinese electric car, and they can import it more freely into the European Union because they don't have those quotas on pollution quotas, etc. That's one disruption. The other disruption is the way we behave, and that's, if you think about Uber, that shows all the disruption. We maybe don't want to own a car much longer. We just want to share it, and that is a big change in consumer behavior. So technology and the consumer, you have to understand both.
Okay, thanks. That's very clarifying, and maybe also a bit connected to this. And you already mentioned it. You're way younger than I am, but energy is something everybody's using. So is it an extra challenge that you have to target so many different segments in energy? Or do you see brands specifying their segmentation on certain groups?
Yeah, there's because I work for a lot of energy companies around the world, and I know them also through the world's best energy brands are charts, and the companies that have become the world's best brands are those who are particularly talking to a segment that they know. For example, this year, PowerShop is a New Zealand retailer. They won the challenger part. There's also an incumbent part or established brands, but they work with a very specific segment, and it's a small segment, but it's large enough for them to be loved by their clients. So, but if you're Eon, or you have those big players in the world, you're NL or you're British Gas or any of the big ones, you can't just talk to one segment, but you have to split up your market, and you have to understand how each segment reacts. So I mean, if you take an example of drinks, like soft drinks, Coca-Cola company again, Coca-Cola knows not everybody drinks Coke, so they have Diet Coke, Coke here and all that, and they also know that people not all drink cola drinks, so that you can have Fanta, or you can have just regular carbonated drinks or whatever. So they have an umbrella of products which tailors to each segment. That's what the energy companies also need to do.
Okay, so you would say that, for example, Eon should have some more flashy brand targeting younger people, and a more trustworthy brand maybe targeting older people, and in that way have some kind of sub-brand.
Either brands or branded products within the umbrella of Eon. For example, just again to take another retailer example, because it's easy for us to understand. And this, so I don't know where the audience are from, which are listening to us, but let's take cereals, which we eat in the morning, and we'll take Cheerio. Cheerio is made by General Mills. It's doesn't really say anything much about it at the packages, but it's made by General Mills. It's branded as Cheerios. It's competing with cornflakes, Kellogg's cornflakes, but Kellogg's has Kellogg's cornflakes, Kellogg's Rice Krispies, Kellogg's this and that, Kellogg's Special K. So they use the Kellogg's brand in all their positioning. General Mills doesn't. Who is right, who is wrong? It's not possible to say, but at least you have to understand what you're doing and work from that. There is not one correct solution, but you have to just know your market, your product, and have a plan going from there.
Yeah, no, exactly. It makes sense. Thanks a lot. Another question. Let's see. What is the biggest difference between branding in the energy space and actual products?
Of course, it's the commodity qualities of energy, because as explaining, you can't really do much about it. It's also the fact that it's to many considered to be like the oxygen we breathe, and we don't want anyone to capitalize on a product that need to live. So it should be provided by the government, if you will, to some. It's also how if you make energy, it's very polluting in many cases. So it's really demanding on the resources of the world. So all these things, and many more actually, they come to play when you promote energy. You can't really promote energy like lollipops, because it's different in the consumer's mind, and that's because of those qualities and others.
Yeah. No, exactly. All right, thanks. Another question. How do you see the future of branding for energy? Do you think that big brands might actually disappear, just like Milman Pet and his cat?
I think there will be. I think it will. Of course, the only thing I know about the future is that I don't know anything about the future. But if I were to read into it, then let's take. I don't know. I think NL, the Italian retailer, it's number 3 or 4 in size in the world. NL is very good in branding, and they are aiming to be there already in 30 different countries where they promote the NL brand. And so it's a Coca-Cola approach, if you will. Eon has 2 times won the world's best energy brands award, because they also understand the need that some people just want to work with one big mega brand, but there will always be a space for smaller guys. So I think energy will go down the same route as more or less any other consumer good. And as a matter of fact, it will become more of a consumer good. Again, with technology, now, if you think about your phones or the cars, they can now drive 400 kilometers or on the battery. This will change. I mean, you can go to the store, you can go to your local market, you can buy a battery which is the size of half a liter or a liter of a soft drink. You put it in your car and you drive 1,000 kilometers. Or you put it in your house and you warm it up for a week or something. I don't know. I don't know the aspects here. But when that happens, and you can actually walk into your local store and pick up energy, it will be more of a consumer good. So you can touch it. You can do all those things. Like we have Duracell, and we have Energizer. We have just regular batteries. This will magnify 1,000 times more energy, 100,000 times more energy. You can buy that in a equally of a container which is of the equal size. You don't have to charge or plug in. That will be old-fashioned. You don't have to go to a gas station or the electricity station. This doesn't apply. There will be no such thing anymore. It will just be regular consumer good.
Yep. No. Okay. Thanks. One last question before we run out of time. A question here is about the circle you showed about energy branding, with energy branding in the middle and are surrounded by marketing, product, sales. Is there any part of that circle that is most important, or would you more see it as one circle coming together in that branding?
It's a good question. Many good questions. It depends on the organization, but I think it's always most important in the beginning to think internally. So when you're if you're not really used to think in terms of branding and you want to start it, you need to look inwards first. So then take the circle where it applies to internal stuff and use that. If you already have done that, everybody has a clear focus of who you are, you can start to look outwards. So it just depends on the market, it depends on the company, which part of the circle is most relevant.
All right, and thanks a lot. Yes, so for the sake of time management as well, I want to thank you one last time for a great webinar. I think it was really interesting, and I hope the audience enjoyed it as well. Also want to thank the audience for tuning in today, for watching the presentation, asking all these nice questions. And then I want to have one last mention of our upcoming Future Grid Labs. I already explained what it's about. You see a link here, www.thefuturegrid.com. You can also find previous webinars, articles, anything about these three topics on this website. And then one last thank you to you, Dr. Fridrik, and thanks a lot to the audience as well.
My pleasure. Thank you.